He sometimes slurred the words to songs he'd sung thousands of times. He poured sweat, leaning heavily on his microphone stand, or his backing singers for support. His famous jumpsuits, custom-made, were tight, revealing a physique far removed from the lean rocker who first shook the world. At his final concert, his last farewell to the crowd was the poignant ballad, "Can't Help Falling in Love." Just weeks later, Elvis Presley would be dead. These weren't just shows, they were the final flickering moments of a supernova, and the details are utterly heartbreaking. Number 7. The King's startling appearance was hard to ignore. Picture Elvis Presley. Go ahead. You probably see the lean, rebellious kid with the sneer from the 50s, or maybe the sleek black leather-clad Adonis of the '68 comeback special. Perhaps even the caped, karate-kicking superhero of the early Vegas years. But the Elvis on stage in June 1977, that was a different picture. And frankly, it was jarring for many who saw him, either in person or later, in the photos and rare footage from that final tour. Let's not sugarcoat it. The King had gained a significant amount of weight. This wasn't just a few extra pounds. Accounts and photos from the time show a man struggling with serious bloating and physical heaviness. His face was puffy, often masking the handsome features that had captivated millions. Those iconic jumpsuits, which once emphasized a powerful physique, now seemed to confine him, straining at the seams. He reportedly weighed upwards of 250 pounds, maybe more, a stark contrast to his performing prime. The physical change wasn't just about the weight, though. There was an undeniable weariness etched onto his features. Observers noted his pallor, a pasty complexion that even the stage lights couldn't fully disguise. He sweated profusely, almost from the moment he walked on stage. Buckets, towels were constantly handed to him by Charlie Hodge, his longtime stage assistant, to mop his brow and neck, but it often seemed like a losing battle. The sweat wasn't just the result of energetic performing. It hinted at the immense physical strain his body was under, laboring under the weight, the lights, and the internal battles he was fighting. Sometimes, his eyes, those bedroom eyes that drove fans wild, seemed distant or unfocused. Other times, they held a spark of the old charisma. A connection flickered on, but the overall impression was one of profound fatigue. He moved slower, the explosive energy of his youth replaced by a more deliberate, sometimes labored stage presence. The karate kicks and dynamic poses were largely gone, replaced by simpler gestures. It wasn't just the audience who noticed. Members of his own band and entourage later spoke about their concern. They saw him backstage, saw the effort it took just to get ready to psych himself up for the energy demanded by a live performance. They saw the physical toll the demanding schedule and his lifestyle were taking. Imagine being a fan in that audience. You came to see the king of rock and roll, the living legend, and he was there undeniably. But the man you saw on stage was also visibly struggling. It created a strange, unsettling cognitive dissonance. You heard the voice, sometimes as powerful as ever, but you saw the physical reality. For those who loved him, it was deeply concerning. For those witnessing it cold, it could be shocking. This physical transformation wasn't just a footnote. It was a central, poignant visual of Elvis's final days as a performer, a stark reminder of the human fragility behind the myth. He was still the king, commanding the stage as best he could, but the physical cost was becoming impossible to hide. The contrast between the vibrant icon of memory and the struggling man on stage was, in itself, a heartbreaking performance. Number 6. He sometimes stumbled over words he'd sung 1,000,000 times. Elvis Presley knew his songs. These weren't complex prog rock epics. They were the bedrock of his career, tunes he'd performed thousands upon thousands of times across 2 decades. Hound Dog, Jailhouse Rock, Love Me Tender. Are You Lonesome Tonight? These were practically embedded in his DNA. Yet, during those final concerts in June 1977, something was noticeably off on occasion. The king, the ultimate showman, sometimes seemed to lose his place. Eyewitness accounts and audio recordings from that last tour tell the tale. There were moments when lyrics seemed to vanish from his memory mid-song. He might start a line and then trail off, mumbling slightly, or turn towards his backing vocalists, perhaps searching for a cue. Other times, the words themselves came out thick or slurred, losing their crisp definition. It wasn't every song, not every night, but it happened often enough to be noticeable and concerning. Think about the pressure. Thousands of expectant faces, the roar of the crowd, the heat of the lights, the thundering band behind him. Performing under those conditions requires intense focus. But reports from the time suggest Elvis was often battling profound fatigue and the disorienting effects of the cocktail of prescription medications he was taking for various ailments, insomnia, pain, high blood pressure, etc. These weren't recreational drugs in the typical sense. They were prescribed by doctors, but the sheer quantity and combination were devastating, impacting his energy, his clarity, and yes, sometimes his memory and speech. Imagine singing "Are You Lonesome Tonight?", a song famed for its spoken word interlude, and fumbling the familiar lines. Or launching into a rocker like Jailhouse Rock, and having the words momentarily escape you. For a perfectionist like Elvis, who deeply cared about his performances, despite appearances sometimes suggesting otherwise late in his career, these moments must have been frustrating, perhaps even embarrassing. His band, the TCB Band, taking care of business, were seasoned professionals, incredibly attuned to him. They could often cover these lapses, keeping the music flowing. His backing vocalists, including Kathy Westmoreland and the Sweet Inspirations, were also crucial, their voices providing support and sometimes gently guiding him back on track. Charlie Hodge, ever present with Scarves and Water, might whisper a forgotten line. It was a team effort, born of long association and for many deep affection for the man they were supporting. But the audience could often tell. You could hear it in the slight hesitation, the brief confusion, the way a familiar phrase might sound slightly off. It added another layer of poignancy to the proceedings. Here was the man whose voice had defined a generation, whose lyrics were sung by millions around the globe, occasionally struggling to recall the very words that made him famous. This wasn't senility or lack of care. It was, according to many accounts, a symptom of the overwhelming physical and chemical burden he was carrying. The mind, clouded by fatigue and medication, couldn't always access the information that should have been second nature. It was a heartbreaking sign that the internal machinery was malfunctioning, even as the external spectacle rolled on. Each forgotten word or slurred phrase was a tiny crack appearing in the facade of the seemingly indestructible king. Number 5. He introduced his dad from the stage in a touching, rare moment. Elvis Presley was famously a mama's boy. His bond with his mother Gladys was legendary, and her early death in 1958 devastated him in ways he arguably never fully recovered from. His relationship with his father, Vernon Presley, was different, complex, sometimes strained by business dealings and Elvis's extravagant spending, but ultimately rooted in familial loyalty. Vernon managed Elvis's financial affairs, lived at Graceland, and was a constant, albeit quieter, presence in his life. Unlike Gladys, whom Elvis often mentioned emotionally on stage in earlier years, Vernon wasn't typically part of the show's narrative. He was the behind-the-scenes figure, the patriarch, handling the practicalities while Elvis handled the magic. That's what made a particular moment during one of those final June 1977 concerts so unusual and touching. During a show on that last tour, specifically noted at the Omaha, Nebraska concert on June 19th, but he may have done it other nights too, Elvis paused the music. He scanned the audience, then looked towards the side of the stage or the wings. He then did something quite rare. He introduced his father Vernon to the massive crowd. "My daddy's here tonight," Elvis announced, or words to that effect. He gestured towards Vernon, who might have given a wave or perhaps just stood there, characteristically reserved. Elvis might have added a few words, perhaps "Say hello, Daddy," or simply basked for a moment in the connection. The crowd, of course, would have roared its approval. They loved Elvis, and by extension, they acknowledged the man who shared his name and bloodline. Why was this poignant? Several reasons. Firstly, the rarity. Elvis kept his professional life and his family life somewhat separate in the public eye, especially on stage. Bringing Vernon into the spotlight like this was an uncharacteristic gesture of public acknowledgement and perhaps affection. Secondly, consider the context. Elvis was clearly unwell. He was struggling physically and, as we now know, was only weeks away from death. Vernon, too, looked older, burdened perhaps by worry for his famous son. Seeing them together, father and son, under the glare of the stage lights during this difficult period had an emotional weight. It was a reminder of the family ties that existed beneath the glitz and the chaos of Elvis's world. Thirdly, it subtly underscored Elvis's own role as a son. Despite being the king, a global icon, a man who commanded legions of fans, he was still Vernon's boy. In that moment, introducing his father, he wasn't just the superstar. He was also a son acknowledging his parent. It humanized him, stripping away a layer of the myth to reveal the man underneath. Some might interpret the gesture differently. Perhaps Elvis felt a premonition, a need to acknowledge his father publicly before it was too late. Perhaps it was a spontaneous moment of warmth cutting through the haze of fatigue and medication. Perhaps he simply saw his dad and felt a surge of connection. We can't know the exact motivation. But what remains is the fact of it. In the midst of his visible struggles during the final tour of his life, Elvis Presley took a moment to publicly honor his father. It stands out as a simple, human interaction in a period marked by excess and decline. It was a fleeting connection back to his roots, a quiet acknowledgement of family offered up to thousands just before the final curtain fell on his performing life. This seemingly small gesture, bringing Vernon into his world on stage, resonates with a quiet sadness and tenderness when viewed through the lens of what was soon to come. Number 4. The setlist included songs that now sound like heartbreaking farewells. An Elvis concert in 1977 wasn't just about the spectacle. It was about the music. And while the setlist still included crowd-pleasing rockers and classic hits, the selection and delivery of certain ballads and anthems during that final tour took on a profound, almost eerie significance in retrospect. Sung by a man visibly weary and struggling, lyrics about pain, loss, regret, and seeking solace resonated with an intensity that felt deeply personal, like unintentional goodbyes, whispered on a grand scale. One song that became a staple of these final shows was Unchained Melody. While a Righteous Brothers hit originally, Elvis made it his own. In the footage captured for the Elvis in Concert TV special, filmed during shows in Omaha and Rapid City, just days before the final Indianapolis concert, his performance of this song is utterly arresting. Sitting at the piano, something he rarely did on stage in later years, he poured raw emotion into the lyrics. "Oh, my love, my darling, I've hungered for your touch a long, lonely time." Sung with palpable feeling, his voice soaring despite his physical state, it felt less like a standard love song and more like a desperate plea, a yearning for something lost or unattainable. The effort is visible, the passion undeniable. Watching it now, knowing it was filmed just before his death, it feels like a direct transmission from his soul. Then there was My Way. Frank Sinatra's signature anthem about living life on one's own terms became a powerful, almost defiant statement in Elvis's hands during this period. Regrets? I've had a few, but then again too few to mention. I did what I had to do, and saw it through without exemption. Delivered with a weary gravitas, it sounded like a man taking stock of an extraordinary, tumultuous life. While some critics found his version bombastic, many fans felt it was Elvis reflecting on his own unique, often isolated journey, the triumphs and the costs. Sung just weeks before his death, the lines, "And now, the end is near and so I face the final curtain," became almost unbearably poignant. He also frequently performed Hurt, a Roy Hamilton song that Elvis imbued with operatic drama. It's a song about devastating emotional pain after love is lost. "I'm hurt to think that you lied to me. I'm hurt way down deep inside of me." Elvis would often deliver this with immense power, sometimes dropping to one knee for dramatic effect, even in his compromised state. The sheer volume and emotional intensity felt like a catharsis, a man wrestling with deep wounds, whether romantic or existential. Another powerful number was How Great Thou Art. Elvis won Grammy Awards for his gospel recordings, and his faith remained a cornerstone, even if his lifestyle often seemed contradictory. Performing this soaring hymn about the majesty of God often seemed to genuinely move him on stage. "Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee, how great thou art, how great thou art." In these final shows, his renditions were often highlights, moments where the voice seemed to regain its purest power, finding solace and strength in the spiritual lyrics. It felt like a connection to something deeper, a plea for grace amidst the chaos. Even his traditional closing number, Can't Help Falling in Love, took on a different hue. What was once a sweet romantic ballad closing out the night now sounded like a final declaration, a tender farewell not just to a lover but perhaps to the audience, to the stage, to life itself. Wise men say only fools rush in, but I can't help falling in love with you. Sung softly, often with a sense of gentle resignation, it felt like the perfect, heartbreaking bookend. These weren't necessarily new songs for Elvis, but the context of June 1977 changed everything. The lyrics seemed to mirror the man singing them, a man grappling with loneliness. Are you lonesome tonight? Pain. Hurt. Defiance. My wave. Faith. How great thou art. And love. Can't help falling in love. Whether intentional or not, the setlist of those final concerts became a soundtrack to his own farewell, each song a poignant echo of the life, the legend, and the struggles of the king in his final days. Number 3. He poured every last ounce of energy into performing, even when it hurt. Despite the visible physical decline, the occasional lyrical stumbles, and the undeniable weariness, one thing stood out during Elvis Presley's final concerts: the sheer, unadulterated effort he put into performing. This wasn't a man phoning it in, coasting on his legend. This was a man digging deep, summoning reserves of energy he seemingly didn't have, pushing his body to its limits to give the audience the show they came for. Witnessing that struggle, that determination against obvious physical odds, was profoundly poignant. Think about the physical demands of an Elvis show, even a scaled-back one from his prime. It involved standing under hot lights for over an hour, singing powerfully, engaging with the audience, hitting emotional peaks, and maintaining the larger-than-life persona of the king of rock and roll. For a man struggling with obesity, breathing issues, likely exacerbated by weight and medication side effects, and overwhelming fatigue, this was a monumental task. You could see the effort in the way he moved. While the karate kicks were gone, he still tried to inject some energy into his stage presence. You could see it in the way he leaned heavily on the microphone stand, using it not just as a prop, but seemingly for physical support. Watch footage from the Elvis in concert. Special notice how often he braces himself, how his breathing appears labored after a particularly demanding vocal passage. His longtime stage aide Charlie Hodge was constantly by his side, not just with scarves and water, but seemingly offering quiet support, a steadying presence. Sometimes Elvis would turn and lean on his backing singers or musicians for a brief moment, catching his breath before launching into the next line or song. These weren't choreographed moves. They looked like moments of genuine physical need. The sweating, mentioned earlier, wasn't just a sign of being overweight. It was a sign of extreme exertion. His body was working overtime, trying to deliver the power vocals and stage presence expected of him, while battling its own limitations. The jumpsuits, soaked through, told a story of intense physical effort. Band members later recounted how exhausted he would be backstaged, how much preparation and psyching up it took to get him ready to face the crowd each night. There are accounts of him needing help navigating stairs or feeling faint between songs. Yet somehow, when the lights came up and the band struck the first chord, he would find something within himself. Why did he push so hard? Part of it was undoubtedly professionalism. Elvis, at his core, was a performer. He understood the contract with his audience. They paid to see the king, and he felt an obligation to deliver, even when it cost him dearly. Part of it was likely the adrenaline, the roar of the crowd acting as a temporary stimulant, masking the pain and fatigue for the duration of the show. Performing was what he did. It was perhaps the one area where he still felt fully in control, fully himself, even as other aspects of his life were spiraling. There's a deep sadness in watching someone push themselves so hard when they are clearly unwell. It's like watching a marathon runner determined to finish the race on a broken leg. You admire the grit, the sheer willpower, but you also ache for their struggle. The audience felt this. While they cheered and screamed for the king, there was often an undercurrent of concern, a recognition of the immense effort unfolding before them. This wasn't just a job for Elvis in those final weeks. It felt like a battle. A battle against his failing health, against the effects of his medication dependency, against the weariness that threatened to engulf him. He didn't always win. The slurred words and forgotten lyrics were evidence of that. But the fact that he fought so hard, night after night, pouring every last drop of his diminished energy into those performances, is a testament to his spirit as an entertainer. It was a final, exhausting display of commitment, a poignant struggle played out in sequins and spotlights. Number 2, despite his struggles, the adoring crowd's roar never faded. Imagine the scene: Market Square Arena, Indianapolis, June 26, 1977. Or any of the arenas on that final tour. The lights dim. The familiar dramatic opening notes of Also Sprach Zarathustra, the theme from 2001, A Space Odyssey, fill the air, building anticipation to a fever pitch. Then he appears, Elvis Presley. Maybe he looks heavier than expected. Maybe he moves a bit slower. Maybe his voice sounds a little tired at first. But none of that seems to matter to the thousands packed into the venue. The moment he steps into the spotlight, the place erupts. The sound is deafening. A wave of screams, cheers, applause, and shouts of, "We love you, Elvis," washes over the stage. This wasn't polite clapping. It was primal, adoring, almost hysterical devotion. And it didn't significantly diminish, even as Elvis's physical struggles became more apparent during the show. This unwavering adoration from his fans right up to the very end is one of the most striking and poignant aspects of his final concerts. These weren't casual observers. These were die-hard fans. Many had followed him since the 1950s. They'd seen him evolve from rebel to movie star to Vegas icon. They bought the records, watched the movies, collected the memorabilia. Seeing Elvis live was, for many, a pilgrimage, a chance to be in the presence of someone they considered almost mythical. And they were fiercely loyal. They saw the changes. Yes, they weren't blind. They could see the weight gain, the sweating, the moments of fatigue. They might have heard the occasional slurred word or noticed him leaning on the muck stand. But for the vast majority in that audience, it didn't seem to break the spell. He was still Elvis. He was still the king. The charisma, though perhaps dimmed by illness and exhaustion, was still potent enough to command the arena. Flashbulbs popped constantly, creating a constellation of tiny explosions in the darkness. Women screamed and cried, reaching out towards the stage as if seeking a blessing. People held up homemade signs declaring their love. When he tossed out scarves, a ritual of his live shows, there were near scruffles in the crowd as fans scrambled to catch a tangible piece of the magic, a sweaty token from the king himself. This intense connection between Elvis and his audience was a two-way street. While his energy levels fluctuated, he clearly drew strength from their adoration. You could see moments where the sheer force of their love seemed to lift him, where a smile would break through the weariness, where he'd make eye contact with someone in the front row and ignite a frenzy. He'd banter with them, make jokes, accept gifts handed up to the stage. He needed them perhaps more than ever in those final days. Their unwavering belief in him seemed to reaffirm his own identity, battling the self-doubt and physical misery he might have felt backstage. The poignancy lies in the contrast. Here was a man visibly declining, battling serious health issues fueled by prescription drug abuse, just weeks away from death. And yet, in the eyes of his fans, he remained eternally powerful, eternally Handak, eternally the king. Their love was a bubble protecting the legend even as the man inside was fading. They weren't necessarily ignoring the reality. Perhaps they were choosing to focus on the magic, on the connection that transcended the physical limitations. They remembered the 50s Elvis, the 68 comeback Elvis, the Aloha from Hawaii Elvis, and they projected that onto the man standing before them, willing him to be that icon one more time. Their roar was a testament to the incredible cultural impact he'd had, the deep emotional connection he forged with millions. It was also, in retrospect, incredibly sad. They were cheering for a man who desperately needed help, celebrating a spectacle that was taking a devastating toll. Their love was genuine, fierce, and unwavering. But it couldn't save him. It could only provide the soundtrack, a roaring, adoring wave of sound, for his final, public farewell. The sound of that crowd, loving him unconditionally even as he faltered, is perhaps the most heartbreaking sound of all from those last shows. Number 1. His very last song on stage was a haunting ballad about saying goodbye. June 26, 1977. Market Square, Arena, Indianapolis, Indiana. The show is drawing to a close. Elvis has given his all, pouring sweat, battling fatigue, connecting with the adoring thousands one last time. He's introduced the band, thanked the audience, tossed out the final scarves. Now, it's time for the traditional closing number. The familiar, gentle notes begin to play. Elvis steps back to the microphone for the last time he will ever sing in front of a public audience. The song, Can't Help Falling in Love. Think about those lyrics sung by this specific man at this specific moment. Wise men say only fools rush in, but I can't help falling in love with you. Shall I stay? Would it be a sin if I can't help falling in love with you? On the surface, it's a tender love ballad, a staple of his repertoire since the Blue Hawaii days. He'd closed countless shows with it. It was familiar, expected a gentle way to ease the audience out of the energy of the concert and back into the real world. But on this night, knowing what we know now that Elvis would be found dead at Graceland less than 2 months later, on August 16th, the song takes on an almost unbearable weight. It transforms from a simple love song into a profound, albeit unintentional, farewell. Imagine him standing there, likely exhausted, possibly feeling the effects of the medications, maybe sensing on some deep level that the end of the road wasn't far off. He sings the lines, "Like a river flows surely to the sea, darling. So it goes, some things are meant to be." In this context, it sounds less like romantic destiny and more like an acceptance of fate, a recognition of an inevitable conclusion. His delivery of the song in these final concerts was often described as gentle, sincere, sometimes tinged with a palpable weariness. It wasn't a throwaway performance. He still invested emotion into it. It was his final connection with the audience each night, his musical kiss goodnight. As the song reached its climax, "Take my hand, take my whole life too, for I can't help falling in love with you," it felt like a final offering. He had given them his hand countless times through the scarves, the brief touches at the edge of the stage. He had in many ways given them his whole life, living under the intense scrutiny of fame since he was a young man. Now here it was distilled into one last musical promise, one final declaration of connection. After the final note faded, Elvis would typically say his famous closing line, "Elvis has left the building." But accounts from the Indianapolis show often focus on his simple words after the song, something akin to, "We'll meet you again, God bless, adios." He then raised his arm, turned, and walked off the stage, the huge cape settling around him, disappearing into the wings as the house lights came up and the exit music played. That performance of "Can't Help Falling in Love" in Indianapolis was the period at the end of the sentence of Elvis Presley's live performing career. The song choice itself, purely by coincidence of being his standard, Closer, became hauntingly perfect. A ballad about irresistible, perhaps illogical love, served as his final message to the fans whose adoration had defined his life. It was quiet, tender, and deeply poignant. He didn't go out with a final defiant rock and roll explosion, but with a gentle, melodic acknowledgement of inescapable connection. A song that now sounds exactly like the farewell it turned out to be. The king sang his own eulogy unknowingly with a love song,